Mr. Prime Minister, my friend, Mr. Khayat, ministers, Mr. Fawad Hussain, Governor. I see friends not only from the chamber here, but the other chambers in Kurdistan, including Sulaymaniyah, Dahok, Kirkuk as well. And of course, I also see friends from the rest of Iraq and the region. What about business is that unlike politics and geopolitics, business is a non-zero-sum arrangement where there are no necessarily winners and losers. That can be winners on all sides. And I'm glad that so many people have been brought together to discuss the growth of private sector to bring about increased economic development. And the chambers can play an important role. They have played an important role in other places to encourage the right policies by the government, as well as to encourage an understanding of investment, of the growth of the private sector to create jobs and to create prosperity. And the fact that the Prime Minister is here listening to the chamber and to people discussing the private sector growth itself shows that Kurdistan has come some distance in appreciating the growth of the role that the private sector can play. I'm encouraged by this because I'm a strong believer that prosperity, lasting prosperity, can come, successful societies can be built when the private sector is thriving, that is providing economic opportunity to the younger people, the population as a whole. So I am always happy to be in Kurdistan, and this is a particularly happy occasion given the importance of this issue. We all know, those of us who pay attention to this part of the world, that Kurdistan has had a difficult couple of years. And those difficulties have very visible reasons for them. There has been a war going on. The threat of Daesh has imposed on Kurdistan the burden of having to fight a war. And I am encouraged by the progress that Kurdistan, the Kurdish Peshmerga, with support from its friends, their friends have made in this regard. Wars are very disruptive, wars are expensive, they impose huge burdens, and that has had, obviously, its impact on the state of Kurdish economy. There has also been a substantial reduction in price of oil over the past several years, and that too has imposed its burden, especially in a region where there is a lot of people on the government payroll, and that has also had its own challenges: reduced income, more expenditure on the war, but continuing expenses that are normally part of what the Kurdistan government has had to do. And there has been also the third big challenge, is these uncertainties about the relationship with the central government in terms of Kurdistan's requirements based on the Iraqi constitution of the 17% of the budget. There has been uncertainties, disruptions, lack of timely payment or not payment at all at times. So given all that, I'm encouraged by the way that the Kurdish government has managed the situation and the patience and the endurance of the Kurdish population, their understanding. I know it hasn't been easy, it has been difficult. I want them to know that their friends understand and appreciate the circumstances in which they have had to operate. Talking about the private sector and the future, which is this war will end, the war against Daesh. I think the Peshmerga, the Iraqi soldiers, local forces, their international allies will succeed in pushing Daesh out of their remaining stronghold of Mosul. I have no doubt about that. Although there are many challenges and issues to be dealt with, both during the war and after the war, with regard to what happens in that area. But I think it will open an opportunity also to think anew about what to do with regard to the future. And I believe that the private sector should be, the growth of the private sector should be a key focus, if I might recommend to the Kurdistan government, a priority of the coming period. Because unfortunately, the private sector has not been as big a factor in the economy of Kurdistan as it should be, because the growth of the private sector, in my view, will help Kurdistan become ever more successful, ever more self-reliant, and therefore it must be a priority. The growth of the private sector is not something that there is some secret formula how to encourage the private sector. There are factors that encourage the growth of the private sector, both internal, local, if you like, as well as attracting foreign private sector investment. And I would like to emphasize, for the remaining time that I have, some of the factors that need to be particularly paid attention to. And I believe the number one factor has to be some sense of confidence about the future. Because if there is no confidence about the future, investors tend to be reluctant to invest, start factories and projects that make their resources, their money, over a longer period of time. They tend to get more people with money in trade rather than investment, to make money quickly. And often some of them take their money out rather than investing the money in the local economy. So therefore, some sense of where the region is going for the long term that gives people confidence about the long term would be an encouraging factor to attract investment. And I hope that in the aftermath of Mosul, some of the challenges with regard to the questions of the future relationship between Kurdistan and the federal government, there will be greater clarity to give people more confidence as to what the next phase of the relationship would be between Kurdistan and the rest of Iraq. There are similar questions inside Iraq as well, of course, in the Arab part. The second thing is that it's very important to appreciate that public policy makes a difference with regard to the private sector. Whether there is a growth of private sector or not is also affected by public policy. And the key requirement is for the government to create a climate in which it gives the private sector confidence. And that is predictability. Is there a business environment that they can count on? Are contracts that are signed being honored? Is there a judiciary, if there is disputes about contracts, that they can resort to a neutral arbiter to resolve them? The government's role, in my view, has two key features, one of which is this environment in which there can be confidence, and two, there is a role with regard to the infrastructure. And here I believe Kurdistan has made progress. Infrastructure such as roads, airports, the provision of electricity, although there is still some distance to go, in my judgment, progress has been made, and there could be more progress made with regard to the building of the infrastructure that companies that want to invest can rely on. And I believe that although there has been a lot of electrical power produced here, still there is not sufficient reliable electrical power for factories to come in here. So future plans for attracting foreign investment would have to take into account the infrastructure requirement. Finance is the third factor. It's very hard sometimes to raise capital for a new project for businesses. Some of the issues with regard to finance, of course, has to do with the difficulties of Kurdistan not being able to control its own macroeconomic policies, its banks. And therefore, when I talk about greater clarity down the road on the relationship, this has to be part of those discussions that makes it easier for Kurdistan to do more of itself, by itself, to create credit for the companies or for the business people, for the investors. I would also say one thing more, where the government and society can play a role, and that's the role of education, to make sure that there are technical people with skills that businesses require in areas where Kurdistan will have a comparative advantage. I know that in some societies, unfortunately, and some of you know my own background, that parents, as they raise their children, as they whisper in their ears or tell them stories about their future, they tend to emphasize to them that success means becoming a government official, generally, becoming a minister, a governor, a general. I think there is the need for a change of mind in many societies where children need to be encouraged that becoming a businessman, producing wealth, which means employing people, opportunities for society, is also a good thing, that it is a positive value. One effect of being a society or part of a country that produces oil is that society becomes so dependent on the state that state jobs become very important, because it's the state that gives things to society rather than the other way around. So I hope, as the parents that are here, since you're already interested in business, but maybe through other communication systems, that this message to be a successful businessman is a positive thing, a good thing, someone that should be respected and valued, will also become part of the future of Kurdistan. And I regard this meeting as a positive step in the development of Kurdistan's private sector. I wish you all very well, and wish Kurdistan a great deal of success. Thank you very much.